Welcome to the Deep Dive. We're here to cut through the noise and get straight to the core knowledge from the sources you send us.
That's right.
Today we're taking a close look at a really interesting fish, the Sicklefin Mullet, Liza falcipinnis.
And we've got a detailed study you provided focusing specifically on this fish in Nigeria's Cross River Estuary.
Yeah, our mission today, to pull out the most crucial findings from this research. We're looking at two main things: how this fish grows.
And maybe more surprisingly, what it's actually eating in that particular spot. We're aiming to turn this, dense scientific paper into something clear and useful for you.
Exactly. And get ready, because there are some quite unexpected discoveries, especially about its diet.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's set the stage first. Who exactly is the Sicklefin mullet? Locally, it's called Imin.
That's right. It's a bony fish, belongs to the mullet family, the Mugillidae. They're pretty widespread, tropical temperate seas, mostly marine, coastal, brackish waters. But, and this is key for our study, they often swim into freshwater areas, like estuaries.
Ah, okay.
Like the Cross River Estuary, usually in shallow spots, less than 20 meters deep, mainly to feed. Apparently, it's the most common type of mullet along the West African coast.
So they're quite adaptable, moving between different kinds of water. How big do they usually get?
Typically around, say, 27 centimeters, but they can reach up to 41. They've got some specific features, like certain scales near the fins, fin ray counts, gives them a sort of grayish-white look.
And why focus on this species? Is it particularly important?
Oh, yeah, for a couple of reasons.
Yeah.
It's a really significant protein source for local people.
Okay.
Supports fishing livelihoods, and also because it tolerates such a wide range of salinity.
Right, you mentioned it moves between water types.
Exactly. That makes it a really suitable candidate for aquaculture, fish farming, because it can handle different water conditions pretty well.
Got it. So, important locally and potentially for farming. Now, this study you sent us, it was very specific in scope.
Very specific. It looked only at Liza falcipinnis in the Cross River Estuary, and just over a 6-month period back in 2013, May to October. And the researchers pointed out, based on, looking at previous studies, that this kind of detailed investigation looking at both growth and feeding for this fish, in this specific estuary, it hadn't really been done before.
Ah, okay, so it's filling a knowledge gap for that location. But zooming out a bit, why is knowing about one fish's diet and growth in one specific estuary so important for, the bigger picture of fisheries science?
Well, because the whole field is shifting. Fisheries management isn't just about managing one species anymore. It's moving towards managing entire ecosystems.
Right, the whole system.
Exactly. And to do that, you need to understand the interactions. Who eats what? What are the links in the food web? Studying a fish's diet is, fundamental to figuring that out. And connecting how it grows with what it eats. That's vital. Because, food quality, food availability, that directly impacts growth, health, everything.
You can't really manage the population if you don't know its basic biology and how it fits into its environment.
Precisely. That's the core idea.
Okay, let's dig into that first part then. How does this Sicklefin mullet actually grow in the Cross River Estuary? The study focused on the length-weight relationship. Can you unpack that a bit? Why link length and weight?
Sure. The length-weight relationship, it's a cornerstone, really, in fisheries science. Think of it as, understanding how the fish's shape changes as it gets bigger.
Okay.
It tells us how weight typically increases as length increases. Yeah. And that's super useful because out in the field, measuring the length of a fish is often way easier than weighing every single one.
Right. Much quicker.
So this relationship lets scientists estimate the total weight or biomass of a fish population just from length data, which is absolutely key for figuring out, how many fish can be caught sustainably.
I see. For stock assessment.
Exactly. And it also tells us about their basic biology, how the population works.
And there's this concept tied to it, right? Allometric or isometric growth. Something about an exponent b.
Yes, precisely. There's an equation, W equals A times L to the power of B. And that B, the exponent, is the important number here.
Okay.
If B is exactly 3, we call that isometric growth, it means the fish grows perfectly in proportion. Length, width, depth, they all increase at the same rate. It keeps the exact same body shape, it's just scaled up.
Like enlarging a photo without distorting it?
Perfect analogy. Now, if B is less than 3, that's negative allometric growth.
Negative allometric?
Right. The fish gets longer, sort of, faster than it gets heavier. It becomes more slender, more elongated as it grows.
Like stretching something out, getting thinner.
Yeah, that's a good way to think about it. And then If B is greater than 3, that's positive allometric growth. The fish gets heavier faster, then it gets longer, becomes stouter or deeper bodied.
Okay, plumper.
Exactly.
So for the sicklefin mullet in this specific study in the Cross River Estuary, what did they find? Which type of growth?
The main finding, the big takeaway, was that the overall growth pattern for Liza falcipinnis there during that time was negative allometric.
Negative allometric. Okay, so getting longer and leaner as they grow.
That's the pattern. The actual B value they calculated from all the fish combined was about 2.8.
Mm-hmm.
And importantly, they ran statistical tests. It wasn't just slightly under 3, it's significantly less than 3. So it's a real statistically valid pattern for this population at that time.
And was that consistent? Did it vary month by month?
Good question. They did look at it monthly. And yes, the B values for each individual month from May to October, they also consistently showed that pattern, all significantly less than 3.
Wow, okay.
So reinforces that finding. Negative allometry seemed to be the rule during the whole study period.
That gives a really clear picture of how they're growing. Now, the study also mentioned condition factor. What's that about?
Right, the condition factor. It's basically an index. Think of it like a measure of the fish's well-being, or maybe its plunkness relative to its length.
Like a quick health check.
Sort of, yeah. A higher condition factor generally suggests the fish is doing better, maybe finding lots of good food, or the environmental conditions are favorable.
And what did they find for these mullets? Was their condition good, bad, average?
The average condition factor across the whole study was about 0.87.
Okay.
And it didn't actually change much from month to month. It stayed relatively stable, which suggests that, on average, the fish were maintaining a fairly consistent level of, let's say, health or condition relative to their size during those 6 months.
Okay, so summarizing. Growing longer and leaner, but maintaining a fairly stable overall condition. That covers the how of growth. Now, let's get to the really interesting part. What's fueling that growth? What is this fish eating in the Cross River Estuary?
Right, the diet analysis. And this is where, as you said, things get quite interesting, maybe even a bit surprising. And understanding the diet, it's not just crucial for managing wild populations, but especially if you're thinking about aquaculture.
Right, farming them. You need to know what feed works best.
Exactly. You need the right recipe, basically.
So how did the researchers figure out what was on the menu?
They used, well, the standard approach, analyzing the contents of the fish's stomach.
Okay.
But they were thorough. They didn't just say count how many of each item they found. They used several different metrics.
Okay.
Like how often a food type showed up in different stomachs, the number of individual items, and also the weight or volume of each food type.
So multiple angle.
Yes. And then they combined all that information using something called the Index of Relative Importance, or IRI.
IRI. Why combine them? Does that give a better picture?
It really does. Because each method alone has biases, like you might find hundreds of tiny algae cells, high numbers, high frequency, but they weigh almost nothing. Or you might find one big chunk of something that weighs a lot, but is rare. The IRI tries to balance all that out to give a more accurate picture of what's truly important in the diet overall.
Got it. A more holistic view.
Okay.
All right, so the moment of truth. Using this IRI, what did the study find were the most important food items for the sicklefin mullet in this estuary? What are they really relying on?
Okay, so brace yourself. This is the surprising part, especially for a mullet, which people often think of as, mud eaters or algae scrapers.
Right.
Looking at the overall IRI percentages across the whole study, the single most important food category was fish and fish parts.
Fish parts, really? Like scales, bits of flesh?
Well, yes, that category includes various fish bits, but the absolutely dominant item within that category, the single most important food item overall by a long shot, was fish eggs.
Fish eggs.
Fish eggs. They accounted for a staggering 41.93% of the total index of relative importance, almost 42%.
Wow. Okay, that is unexpected. Nearly half the importance of their diet is just eggs from other fish.
Incredible, isn't it? It really highlights a specific feeding strategy, or at least opportunity, in that estuary during that time.
Definitely changes the picture of a typical mullet. So, what came after fish eggs and fish parts?
The second most important category was plant materials. That made up about 29% of the IRI.
Okay, so plants are still significant. It's not just eggs.
No, definitely not just eggs. They are clearly omnivorous. Plant materials are a major component, too.
And after plants.
Then came zooplankton. Tiny animals in the water. They were third at around 11% IRI. And after that, phytoplankton, the microscopic plants, at just under 7%.
Okay.
There were other things too, like detritus, bits of debris, some unidentified stuff, but based on the IRI, they were much less important than those top 4.
So the clear hierarchy is fish eggs, number 1 by a landslide, then plant materials, then zooplankton, then phytoplankton. That egg finding is really something.
It really is. And it wasn't necessarily the same every single month either. The study noted that the importance of these different food groups fluctuated over the study period.
Temporal variation, right. So their diet shifts a bit seasonally or month to month.
Seems so. And they also mentioned evidence for what's called ontogenetic shifts.
Meaning
the diet likely changes as the fish get older or bigger. Smaller fish might eat different proportions of things compared to larger ones.
Makes sense. So their menu changes with the seasons and with age. Very dynamic. Okay, so we know what they eat, surprisingly, lots of fish eggs. And how they eat changes. But did the study look at how much they eat, like their feeding intensity?
Yes, they did. They looked at feeding intensity using a couple of measures. First was something called relative food weight. That's basically the weight of the food found in the stomach compared to the fish's own body weight. It gives you an idea of the quantity they're consuming relative to their size.
Okay, a measure of how full they are, essentially.
Sort of, yeah. And the second measure was simply the percentage of stomachs that contain food. That tells you more about how consistently they are feeding. Are most fish eating, or are many empty?
Right. So what did those 2 measures reveal?
Well, the percentage of stomachs with food was actually very high overall, over 87%.
Wow, okay.
So most of the sicklefin mullets they caught had food in their stomachs. It tells us they are pretty consistent feeders during this period. They're actively eating most of the time.
But what about the relative food weight?
That showed more variation. It changed month by month. It was lowest back in May, but it peaked quite dramatically in July.
Peaked in July. How much higher?
It was more than 3 times higher in July compared to what it was in May.
Okay, so even though most fish had food throughout, the amount of food they had in their stomachs relative to their size really spiked in July. What might that suggest?
Well, it could mean a few things. Maybe food. Perhaps those fish eggs or other key items was just much more abundant in July.
Right, peak availability.
Or maybe the fish's energy needs, their metabolic demands, peaked in July for some reason, causing them to eat more voraciously. The study doesn't definitively say why, but it shows a clear peak in feeding intensity in terms of quantity during that month.
Interesting. So consistent feeders generally, but with a real peak in consumption mid-year. All right, let's pull this all together. We've learned how they grow in the Cross River Estuary, that negative allometry getting longer and leaner.
Right.
We've uncovered their diet with that really surprising reliance on fish eggs, followed by plant materials and zooplankton.
A very specific dietary profile for this location and time.
And we know they're consistent feeders, but the amount they eat peaks at certain times, like July in this study. So what does all this specific biological information mean for you, the listener? Why is this useful?
Well, this study provides really crucial foundational biological data, specifically for this fish in this estuary where this info was apparently lacking.
Okay.
For anyone involved in fisheries management there, knowing how this important commercial species grows, that negative allometry pattern, is vital. And knowing what it eats, especially the reliance on eggs and plants.
How does that help management?
It informs decisions about fishing pressure, maybe potential size limits. If they get leaner as they grow, does that change how you value different sizes? And the diet? Well, if they rely heavily on eggs from other species, maybe you need to think about protecting the spawning grounds or seasons of those species, too, to ensure the mullet has food.
Ah, I see. The ecosystem connection.
Exactly. And for aquaculture, the potential farming. These diet findings are gold.
Because you know what to feed them.
Precisely. Knowing the importance of fish eggs and plant material gives you a direct blueprint for creating effective, maybe cheaper artificial feeds to grow them successfully in farms. You can't just guess.
Makes sense. And ecologically.
Ecologically, it pins down the Sicklefin mullet's specific role in the Cross River estuary food web. Knowing it's a major consumer of fish eggs clarifies its impact on other fish populations and its own position in the ecosystem. What eats it? What does it compete with? This is all key information for that modern ecosystem-based approach to management we talked about earlier.
Right. It fills in a piece of the puzzle for that specific environment.
Exactly. Foundational data that just wasn't there before, according to the study.
So there you have it. Our deep dive into the Sicklefin mullet of the Cross River Estuary based on the detailed study you provided. We've seen they grow longer and leaner and discovered their fascinating, somewhat unexpected diet, heavy on fish, eggs, and plants.
It paints a clear biological picture for this specific time and place. And it does leave us with a final thought, building on what we've just discussed.
Okay.
Given how incredibly important fish eggs turned out to be in the diet of this commercially valuable mullet, what are the potential knock-on effects? Think about environmental changes or pollution or specific fishing practices in the Cross River Estuary that might harm the reproduction or reduce the availability of eggs from other fish species. What could that mean for the future health, the population size of the Sicklefin mullet itself, given this apparent dependency? How might understanding this specific food link influence broader conservation or management strategies for the entire estuary ecosystem?
That's a really important question to ponder. How vulnerable does this make the mullet population? Something for you to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.